Bangladeshi people in hosting Rohingya refugees, especially now that we are in the 6th year of this protracted crisis. We remain committed to working towards durable solutions to the crisis and will continue to partner with the government of Bangladesh, the Rohingya community, host communities, and people inside Burma to ensure a coordinated and well-supported response to this humanitarian crisis. The international community must remain steadfast in our commitment to alleviating the suffering of the world's most vulnerable people, including through the Rohingya crisis response. With that, happy to take questions.
Can I just ask you to clarify or extrapolate a little bit on what you said about the Mexico? So you're saying that, yes, you have now been able to confirm that 2 of the 4 were killed?
That's correct.
And that the other that the other 2 are now back in the U.S. The 2 survivors.
The 2 survivors have since been repatriated back to the United States. That occurred with the assistance of our Mexican partners, with the assistance of our officials in Mexico. We are in the process of working to repatriate the remains of the 2 Americans who were killed in this incident.
Okay, so those bodies are not back.
Not yet.
And I understand that the investigation is still early, but do you have any reason to believe that they were targeted?
Matt, just as you said, the investigation is in its earliest days. I understand we may have more to share from the FBI at the appropriate time, but from the Department of State, it's important for us not to impinge on investigative equities, especially in an investigation like this that implicates the kidnapping of 4 Americans, the death of 2 Americans, and 2 Americans who survived what, by all accounts, must have been a traumatic and harrowing experience. So we don't want to get ahead of that investigation. Go ahead.
This is ongoing about Georgia. Have you been following the situation in Tbilisi, Georgia? Since morning there were clashes between the protesters and the police, and there were clearly an excessive use of law enforcement power. And this is over the Kremlin-inspired legislation that you talked extensively in the last few weeks. So what are you learning about that?
We've been closely following developments in Georgia in recent hours. We've seen the reports that are emanating from Tbilisi. We've seen reports that protesters have been met with tear gas, with other efforts to repress and suppress the protest against this draft so-called foreign agents legislation. Our message to the people of Georgia, to the government of Georgia, to people and governments around the world is that the United States stands with all of those who are peacefully exercising what is a universal right. It is a universal right to people around the world to assemble, to have their voices heard, to speak freely, to hold their own governments accountable. We are going to continue to monitor the situation on the ground in Georgia, but our message is that peaceful protesters should be allowed to exercise that right peacefully. That is a right that is available to people in Georgia. It is a right that is available to people in every country around the world.
And very lastly, today's latest statement by the Embassy of the U.S. in Georgia starts with the sentence, "Today is a dark day for Georgia's democracy," and the entire text is the harshest that I've ever seen, throughout the 30-plus years of diplomatic relations. So just give me a general sense of what is the feeling at the State Department between diplomats when they are looking at those, human rights records, rule of law, the freedom of speech, and detrimental effect it has towards Euro-Atlantic integration. How much will the U.S. foreign policy and the foreign aid and all of that will change if that trajectory will be continued by the Georgian government, and which is moving the country towards Russia?
You asked about the feeling here. The feeling here is one of deep concern. You have heard us express that.
You've been listening to the State Department press briefing. Press Secretary Ned Price confirmed the death of 2 Americans in Mexico. He said the 2 survivors have been returned to the United States.
For more on this, let's bring in Enrique Acevedo. He is a CBS News contributor and anchor for Enye Mas. He is following the story for us from Mexico City. Enrique, welcome. So what more do we actually know about the surviving victims from Friday's kidnapping?
Well, we know they were found in a safe house. The investigation is now focusing on that address. We know there are security forces from state authorities, from federal authorities, with the help of the FBI, going through that safe house. The two survivors are now in the U.S. That's been confirmed first by local authorities in Mexico. And now we just heard the spokesperson for the State Department, Ned Price, confirm that information, that they are actually back in the U.S. The bodies of Shahid Woodward and Sindel Brown will be repatriated to the U.S. later today. It's an ongoing investigation, and details are scarce. And I've been trying to make this point over and over again, Elaine. Details are scarce because Matamoros has become so dangerous that it's even hard for reporters, for independent journalists to operate there and try to get information.
Enrique, what can you tell us about how these two U.S. citizens may have been returned home? Like you said, I know it's hard to get some of the details at this hour, but what are you hearing?
Well, what we know is that they were transported from Matamoros back to Brownsville, Texas, in a vehicle. And then apparently, plans are that they'll be flown back to South Carolina. Again, that's not information that I've been able to verify independently or confirm with more than one source, but that's what we heard, that once they were found, that they knew they were stable in terms of their health condition, that they were able to repatriate them back across the border to Brownsville, Texas. And from there, I'm guessing they'll be evaluated again by doctors on the U.S. side of the border, and then flown back to South Carolina, back home, Jericho.
And Enrique, what more can you tell us about just that area where this kidnapping took place? Matamoros, you touched on how violent it is. And what more are we learning about how things unfolded Friday night and then in the days that followed?
On Friday night, what we saw was widespread violence in Matamoros, rival groups fighting over control of the territory. Matamoros is not just one of the most dangerous cities at the U.S.-Mexico border, but really one of the most dangerous places in the world. And that's because these drug cartels that are also in the human trafficking business have become so powerful. And that's where the paradigm of co-responsibility really comes in. And it's important for us as journalists to emphasize this. The guns that these cartels are using are coming from the U.S. The cash that's fueling this power, the power to corrupt officials and act with impunity, is also coming from money laundering, mostly in the U.S. So both countries really have to fight to end the cycle of violence and address and acknowledge this reality.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a harsh reality when you put it like that, and you make those types of connections. What actions are Mexican authorities taking as the investigation into Friday's kidnapping continues?
I think when you look at it from the Mexican perspective, of course, they want to find out what happened, if there was a confusion, if they were targeted. It seems, because of what we've heard so far, that these 4 American citizens were caught in the crossfire and were held in the confusion. Initially on Friday night, when we started reporting this story, there was a lot of talk about immigrants from Haiti being involved. That, of course, eventually was clarified. But I really want to be clear on this point. We never see this happen in Mexico, where 4 people are taken in the crossfire in a very violent episode like the one we're seeing on camera right now. And then they're found a couple of days later, or 3 or 4 days later, and some of them survive. You never see that happen in Mexico. The only reason why some of these American citizens survive is because they're American. And that's the harsh reality that thousands of Mexicans have to face. They would have no chance of surviving something like this unless they had an American passport.
Yeah, you really put it in perspective, saying it's one of the most dangerous places in the world. Enrique Acevedo, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Authorities in Iran make some progress investigating the alleged poisoning of hundreds of schoolgirls across the country. We look at what they found and what action they have taken.
Plus, protesters in France are looking to shut down the country. We'll talk about why President Macron's government is standing by its plan to raise the retirement age. You're streaming CBS News.